Trigger warning. While specifics are not directly discussed, the upcoming episode could be traumatic for those listening.
Shut up. Stay in your lane.
Welcome to the Mind Your Own podcast with Aaron Sorensen and Sasha Durkin, where we stick to sports, except when we're not.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mind Your Own podcast. I'm Aaron.
I'm Sasha.
And I shouldn't just say another episode of the Mind Your Own podcast. This is the first episode of 2022. Yeah. We have returned. Sasha, I've missed you. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, it's been weird to not be recording these on the day that we record them. But I think also I feel a little refreshed and energized to kind of dive into 2022. I'm excited for what the year brings us.
Yes. I mean, that's the thing is I'm not a big resolution person. I want to be clear when I say that. I am not against resolutions at all. If you are somebody who likes to set resolutions, great. I'm just big on do what's right for you. Yeah. I do like this time of year because there's so much kind of hope for what the year ahead can bring. It's definitely a time to kind of reflect on the things that maybe you want to accomplish, maybe the things that you thought, oh, that didn't happen in the last year. I'd like to spend more time here. For me, I just have found that I'm really lacking on my own personal creativity. So it's something that I'd like to focus on more in 2022. So it's I'd like to see where I get by December. Yeah. So I like this time of year, whether you're a resolution person or just hey, I'm just going to keep going. Honestly, this is just a good time for reflection, no matter what that looks like. You don't need to be tied to any kind of specific resolution unless that's something that works really well for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I saw a post not that long ago because I'm not a big resolution person either. I have a bunch of different thoughts on that, but I'm, again, like you, I'm not against anybody making them. But I saw a post that was pick a word for the year. And I was the one that popped out to me on the piece of paper, the post or whatever was intention. And I was that is a good one. Because last year I was all about I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. If I commit to something, I'm going to do my best to keep that commitment. But I think intention is a good word, just given everyone keeps saying we've been in this pandemic for 3 years, but it's only been 2.
It's only, we're heading into the 3rd year, but let's not jump the gun quite yet. We actually haven't even been technically, depending on where you live, 2 years, but it's didn't even hit the peak of everything for another couple of months. So we're not even fully 2 years into it. So
exactly.
Glass half full.
Exactly. But I thought intention was a good one just because I think that the word and definition intention is putting the things in place to do what you're going to do, to get to a goal. So I thought that was a good word. Well,
with intention, I like that word a lot because I'm going to do a little plug for you. I think before we get anywhere else, I do want to just say, and we'll link this in the show notes. Sasha also co-hosts a podcast called all my words are just jumbling together this morning. She co-hosts a podcast called Meathead Test Kitchen. It has been nominated for Best Fitness Podcast in the Sports Podcast Awards. You can vote right now, and we can link that if you'd like to go put some support behind Sasha and Sadie and what they are doing with Meathead Test Kitchen. So when we're talking about intention and resolutions and maybe lack thereof of resolutions and just setting goals and different things, it's a great podcast. Really recommend it. I was going to wait until the end of the podcast to throw that plug in, but I figured I would put it at the top of the show in case any of you decide to leave early because you need to hear it now. So go vote.
With that said, too, there are also 2 Hail Varsity podcasts or 2 other podcasts on the Hurrdat Media Network. I-80 Preview with Brandon Vogel, who you may be familiar with if you are familiar with Hail Varsity, and also Athletes Unfiltered, which is co-hosted by Jeff Ekstrom and former now Nebraska quarterback Adrian Martinez. So those 2 podcasts are also voted or in the best college sports podcast category. So you can vote for them too.
There's a lot. I mean, look, 2022 is already off to a great start. So, when we were talking about what we wanted to kick off this new year with, it's going to be a little bit of a heavier topic, but I think it's an important one because, like many of you, I feel like as the weather has gotten colder, we are definitely in the thick of winter. Like it has come with a vengeance. Like we were coasting along with some nice warm weather in December, and then that last week of December, it just hit us like a ton of bricks. We are in winter. Now we're going to get like those like random warm January days where it's like a rare 45, 50 degree day. And you kind of get a little hope that spring is near. And then you have to remember that February is still ahead. So again, we are in the thick of winter, which means it's a really good time to binge watch TV shows. And in fact, I have seen so many of you, Yellowstone is a big one right now.
Oh my gosh. By the way, really quick on a light note, that is a really good show. And if you haven't watched it yet, I was told that it would start off slow, but like I didn't think it started off slow at all. I mean, it gets right into it. So it's really good. There are 4 seasons. They just finished up season 4. So go watch that if you can.
I know Ozark is about to come out as well with the final season. So it's like a good time, a lot of binge watching. Now for me, one of my favorite shows on Netflix is Cheer. Cheer season 2 just recently dropped. I have already watched all 9 episodes. Before we dive into what we wanted to talk to specifically with, not about Cheer per se, but Cheer definitely kind of is the like springboard into the conversation. The thing that like when Cheer debuted, this is wild. This is super, super wild for anyone who's like, hey, we've been in this pandemic for 3 years. Like when we were talking about like actually thinking about the time, the first season of Cheer debuted in January 2020. That show
seems like a billion years ago.
Yeah, my brain had thought that was like we had watched it pandemic, kind of like Tiger King, but it wasn't. It had come out before, because they were even starting to film season 2 before the pandemic hit, because they did not know what was coming at that point. So I loved Cheer season 1. Now, I'll give a little context to this. As a former cheerleader myself, I have often felt that cheerleading does not get the respect that it deserves. And now it's starting to more and more, but especially competitive cheerleading. I grew up in like when I was in high school, cheer was not considered a sanctioned sport. In many cases, it's still not. That is incredibly dangerous because in many cases, especially in middle schools, high schools, anything that's not like a gym-based setting across this country, there are teams that are setting out mats in lunchrooms. They're setting out mats in spaces that basically they can find. They're doing practices where they are tumbling and they are going full out without an athletic trainer available to them. They do not have the same, they just don't have the same resources that a true, quote unquote, true sport might have. And I have long felt that this is incredibly dangerous, where you have literal gymnasts not receiving the same kind of just attention that they should of any other sport in a school. So when Cheer came out, it was like, this is amazing because it's going to bring continued attention and respect to the sport. And you saw Navarro Community College in Texas, one of the best in the country, be just great at what they do. Coach Monica, who has been with Navarro for, I think they said like 8 or 9 years now. She's been there. Like she is like the Nick Saban of collegiate cheerleading. Now they're a junior college. They compete at the junior college level. Now, when you ever look at like, there's 2 different like governing bodies of competitive cheer and dance. And you might be like, what's the difference? One is the National Dance Association, National Cheer Association, and one is the Universal Cheer and the Universal Dance Association. It's just 2 entities, and it's just a choice which one you want to participate in. Like when I was competing, we competed within the UCA, UDA world, but like Navarro goes through NDA, NCA, a lot of this is just my perspective. A lot of programs that have athletes that come from the, what's the word I'm looking for? They compete with like their gyms. That like group tends to also be more in the NDA, NCA world. So long story short, I was very excited when Cheer season 1 came out because it was something where I was like, this is going to be bring respect to the sport. People very quickly fell in love with the athletes. You saw just a broader respect for what was happening. And I think a lot of times, like, especially with like male cheerleaders, like there's always like a stigma associated, and then suddenly you're now seeing like, holy smokes, these are incredibly strong men. They're true like athletes. In some cases, like one of the secondary, not secondary, but the Trinity College Trinity Christian, is it Trinity Christian? My brain is like all over the place. I like, if anybody wants to know like how my like cheer, like whatever, Trinity Valley. Oh my gosh. I don't know why I said Trinity Christian. I think my brain was like pulling 4 different schools together. So like Trinity Valley's head coach, that this is like when I said secondary school, like their focus they're like got like a secondary focus in the second season of cheer. Okay, we're back on track. Anyway, their head coach, he talks about like he grew up playing football. He grew up playing other things. He grew up doing all of this other stuff. So like for him, like, I think not to say that to legitimize anything he does, but for him, he just saw a greater path forward in cheerleading where he was like, I was a better cheerleader than I was a football player. And so because of him, he was able to get, scholarships, opportunities. He's now a head coach at a college, leading a team to nationals. They just competed head on head with Navarro. I'm not going to give any spoilers away about like what ended up happening if you haven't watched. It's just, cheerleading is a really, really tough sport, and I was so excited to see it get that attention. All of that to say, one of the things that season 2 of Cheer had to address. So after season 1 of Cheer debuted, they had this spring of just absolute chaos. They were invited to meet Oprah. Oprah had them come to a big event that she did. They were on the Ellen show. They were going to things like the Oscars. They became instant celebrities. Kendall Jenner fell in love with one of the cheerleaders and got to meet her. And that was like a whole thing, and got to do a cheer with them. And in this process, one of the cheerleaders that became an instant fan favorite, I loved him, was a cheerleader named Jerry Harris. He had this story of like, he had a tough upbringing. He was from Chicago. He was just like somebody that like had every reason to sort of like look at the world as jaded and be upset and feel like things had not been handed to him, but he had the best attitude. He was known for what was called Matt Talk. He Matt talked people, and he was just so energetic and happy. And so again, they would have him go to the Oscars, or Ellen would have him come on her show, and they would have him Matt talk people, and he became an instant celebrity overnight. I mean, his following grew exponentially. He was invited to cheer gyms all over to continue just this like frenzy of celebrity that came very quickly. But the thing that we did not know was happening behind the scenes is during this time period, Jerry had been messaging other cheerleaders, many of whom, if not all, were underage. And like, we're talking 13, 14, 15 years old, and soliciting explicit photos, videos, sending them explicit photos and videos. The 2 young men who ultimately brought this story forward, they are twins. One of them was even cornered in a bathroom at a cheerleading competition where Jerry wanted him to have sex with him. And when their mom found out about this, she obviously was horrified, wanted to do something about it, reported the incident, and ultimately found that nothing was happening. Like, it's just like people weren't taking it seriously. And so she was continuously looking for what can be done? How can I protect my sons, and how can we ensure that this doesn't happen to anyone else? I'm like severely like not the story. I mean, for her, this took place, I think she said, from like May until like August was like the time period of like trying to get anyone to pay attention. So we'll link all of the stories if you want to go read any of these. Now, episode 5 of Cheer season 2 is the episode that deals with this entire topic really in depth. The episode is called Jerry. I really recommend it. I think Cheer did a really good job of presenting it because they knew they had to. The way that this second season goes is it starts with the 2020 season. It ends in episode 4 when the pandemic hits, and then you get into episode 5, which is kind of everything that then happens to what leads to the Jerry being indicted in September. So then season, as you can kind of guess, season 2 then follows into the 2021 season. So it's almost like a 2-year arc, but it's cut in the middle by the story of what happened with Jerry. So the two twins, and I do want to say they're twin brothers, Charlie and Sam. They are absolute, like, they knew that they were going to get a lot of hate, and they knew that like people were going to, they were going up against everyone's beloved Jerry. And I mean, the fact that they were only 13 when all of this started happening to them. And when I was watching them and watching just the strength that they had to sit there and talk about what happened and why they came forward and why this was so important, I was just like, I hope that they feel the support that they so deserve, because these are the hard things that have to happen. You have to have people coming forward to make change in these spaces.
Yeah.
So ultimately, in the end, Charlie and Sam's mom filed a report with the FBI that really kickstarted people actually paying attention. USA Today broke an article, which we'll come back to USA Today because that might sound a little familiar in just a moment. And then, like I said, by September, he had been indicted. The reason that USA Today and this whole story it honestly kind of like sent a shiver down my spine when I heard it. So the attorney for Sam and Charlie, she is one of the earliest known victims of abuse by former United States gymnastics physician Larry Nassar. She talked about her own experience where even at the age of 25, she was going to see Nassar for treatment and not realizing what he was doing was not something that that is not true treatment. She did not realize she was being sexually assaulted by this person until more and more gymnasts started coming forward. So USA Today, the two USA Today journalists who broke the story on Harris, they had done a larger investigation into sexual misconduct within the cheerleading world. Now, also, USA Today is who did the big investigation into what was going on into United States gymnastics. So the reason that I told Sasha I wanted to talk about this is, as I was watching season 2, after we got to the end of it, my now new husband, he made a comment about, how is this sort of just allowed? Like, how is this a thing between both gymnastics and cheerleading? And I won't lie, there's a lot of crossover. A lot of gymnasts end up as competitive cheerleadings. A lot of competitive cheerleaders do gymnastics, obviously, because they're in the same gyms. Tumbling is it is gymnastics with it's insane. Again, when we talk about like treating cheerleading as a sport, there's a reason. There's just a different like extra layer to cheerleading that gymnastics maybe doesn't necessarily have with like the performance. But even then, like anyway, that's a whole nother episode about gymnastics versus cheerleading, whatever. But I was kind of sitting there thinking about it because as somebody who did cheer, I immediately felt like wanting to like defend the sport of like, well, no, it's not all bad. And the thing is it's not. But there are these like really dark sides to gymnastics and these really dark sides to cheerleading that have been allowed to just continue for years and years and years and years. And when you think about these sports, gymnastics and cheerleading are sports that you have like really wide ranges of ages working with one another.
Yep.
You have teams where you have a 13-year-old competing with a 30-year-old on the same team. And that's not even including the coaches and the trainers and the people who have access to these kids. And the thing with like, and I remember this, the thing about with competition-based sports like this is often parents are not present for a lot of things. They're there, they're watching, but there are many times where like, I mean, even watching cheer, there's young athletes who are saying my parents couldn't afford to travel to some of these competitions because it's not like every competition is down the street. Some of them are taking you out of state. They're taking, so there are opportunities for people to pray because it's just a different world and competitive situation. And for so many parents, it's not like a lack of like, it's not like they don't like care about their children. It's not like they're not paying attention. It's just they're not physically present. And that is where people are praying, is they're praying in these like gaps where they think no one is looking. And that is the really scary thing about cheerleading and gymnastics. And those aren't the only two sports. There are plenty of other sports that have had
of hockey.
like there are just worlds that like need to be addressed.
Yeah, it's when you put it like that, like, and this isn't like, don't put your kids in gymnastics or cheer. It's more calling attention to the fact that it's 2022 now at this point, and these things are still happening. And when you sent me the information on what we're going to talk about today, my gut reaction was, how are we still here? How is this not talked about? And I felt, I guess the best emotion that I could put on it is ashamed that I didn't know more about this. That's how much it's not talked about. Like, we both thought that this was a super important conversation to have, just because I don't know that there is enough awareness until larger cases like this happen. And at that point, there's already lifelong damage done to the individuals that this is happening to. And it's lifelong because it's lifelong trauma and it's lifelong things and injuries that you have to work through, like sometimes for the rest of your entire life.
And you think of like the amount of like, it goes so far beyond just like, so when we think about like the case that was ultimately brought against Larry Nassar and the amount of women who had to come forward and say, this is something that happened to me, and the amount of trauma that had to be exposed just to convict somebody of all of their wrongdoings. But you think about all of the things that he did beyond just his own victims. He changed the comfortability of so many athletes where they now don't know who to trust. They don't know who has their best interest at heart. They don't know. It goes so like when it's almost like an onion, you peel the layers back of the damage of the things that they have, like the ripple effect of what they have done in the sport. And like I was saying this to Sasha, you think of Simone Biles as somebody who literally felt so like she could, like her own mental health was so affected. She went and started her own gym because that was the only way for her to feel safe in a space that she loves. And I think about like when I talk about how Cheer, I felt did a good job with how it handled the episode on Jerry. They did not make him seem like, I don't feel like they made you feel empathetic for him at all.
Right.
I think where I felt a little bit more empathetic toward anyone outside of just the victims themselves, like I want to be clear, like that is first and foremost. But I'm talking about secondary from that was listening to his teammates who felt so blindsided, who felt like like one of his teammates, Ladarius Marshall, who said, I would have snatched him up if I would have ever known about this stuff. I feel like it would have been worse than him going to jail. I don't care how famous you are, how much money you've got. I don't care how much people love you. That don't give you the right to do stuff like this, especially when one of your best friends, went through something like that.
Yeah.
And like to hear like the pain that you could feel in like someone like Ladarius's voice of like, this is not what I knew. And to feel almost so like blindsided by the fact that this is somebody that they had all supported. And now you're feeling almost like you just don't know people. And that's the thing that is really, really hard. And I will say like the one thing that the episode did that I think is really, I even need to do some more reflection on is, and I'll even just go read it. When this all happened, Monica, the coach of Navarro, she was on Dancing with the Stars. She had gone to Los Angeles in August. This predated anything that they knew. There was no it's not like she left knowing something was coming. This predated anything. So She was in Los Angeles when the news broke. And the way that the show depicts what ends up happening for her. She was on stage at Dancing with the Stars for dress rehearsal. Her phone wasn't with her. She was getting ready for the live show, and an executive producer basically came up and said, "Have you heard what happened?" And she basically had to go through the show, and she was dreading going back to get her phone because she was just like processing everything she was learning. And so she ends up posting this on Instagram. Our hearts are shattered into a million pieces. We are devastated by this shocking, unexpected news. Our children must be protected from abuse and exploitation, and we are praying hard for the victims and everyone affected. Please respect our privacy as our family mourns during this heartbreaking time. The attorney for Sam and Charlie did not like this statement. She felt like what Monica should have said was basically, I stand with all children. Like, basically she wanted her to go harder at Jerry in that moment. And the only thing that like I have to even process with this is kind of like sometimes our reaction to things and our reaction to other people's reactions, because in this case, like watching sort of the process of Monica choosing to write this and share this on Navarro's Instagram account, you could tell she was kind of trying to come to terms with like for her, she's like, I felt like a parent figure to this individual. And she hadn't, like, I don't know if she's spoken to him yet, but at the time when they filmed Cheers, she's like, I've heard from him, but I have not responded because I don't know what I would say. I don't have the words. I don't know what I would say to him. So you can tell the like heartbreak that she's feeling. And I think like knowing what Sam, the attorney, went through herself in gymnastics helps me kind of understand her process of thinking as well. But I think for me, it was just a reminder of, in these situations where people are sort of having to process real time, especially on social media, allowing a little grace as people come to terms with what is actually happening. Because I think social media has changed there's a need for instant reaction. We have to say something right away. If you're not saying something right away, you're either condoning or you're basically like you're saying something by saying nothing, which sometimes is true. But I also think sometimes allowing people a little space to process so that they don't feel like they have to say something until they're more aware of what it is that they can say for themselves. It was just something that I just want to throw out there, that when I was watching this episode, I was like, I think I tend to jump to conclusions of what people are saying in a moment. And maybe I even need to do some reflection on like.
That's what I was going to that's what my thought process was as you were explaining this, is like, what you just said, if you don't respond right away, then it's perceived as you're in some way condoning it, when really something of this magnitude, I feel like you should be given the grace to be able to collect your thoughts and actually, instead of like gut reaction, like, I don't think that whatever she would have said or could have said differently or whatever in that very moment, I don't think is possible. Cause it's heavy and it's shocking, and it's got a lot of gratitude. That's not a word. But it's a grave situation. And I think being able to put together the proper words and to like be able to make everyone feel like you said the right thing is kind of impossible. When the need with social media is to feel like you have to put something out immediately.
And I think when we get frustrated with people, we sometimes are ignoring where we should be placing our frustration and anger and blame. So like one of the things for me that I walked away from this story, this episode, but also having had followed this story from the time that it broke, is that Sam and Charlie's mom, she not only went to cheer athletics, the gym that Harris was affiliated with, and was ultimately blown off, by the way. The woman who owns the gym, or at least one of the owners, essentially like kind of treated it like you're misunderstanding, whatever. I'm like, that needs to be probably looked a little bit more hard. Like there needs to be a harder look there. I would be more frustrated there because this is somebody who is having information brought to them and is ultimately passing it off as your misunderstanding. At least that's how it was presented. Like I wasn't a part of the conversation, so I can't speak to it, but that is how it was presented when they were interviewing Sam and Charlie's mom. She was basically like, she did not take it seriously. She also went to the United States All-Star Federation because All-Star Cheer, that's the word I was looking for. A lot of these gyms, All-Star Cheer is a big deal. It's a very big business. I promise you, most of your towns have an all-star gym, if not a couple. I know Omaha, for instance, has a couple. Lincoln, I think, has at least one. And I'm just talking in Nebraska. So think about like when you're talking all across the country, these all-star gyms are big businesses. And so they have the United States All-Star Federation. She went there and same thing. It was just pretty much was like not a thing. And what's the I'm going to go look this up really quick. But the fact that she was going to people that you feel like as a parent, hey, these people should be able to help me. She even went to like, and I can't even remember which she went to, but she reported essentially the like child sexual abuse. And like that was essentially like ignored. Like she went to multiple places thinking, these people are going to help me. Now, I saw some people who were like, why didn't you go to the police? But like, again, you're going to where you think you should start, which is like the people who are the head of things. And so she did go to the FBI, and that was really where the FBI was the one that pretty much, it sounds like once the FBI was alerted, it was like a pretty quick turnaround. But I mean, I felt just like it was just so harrowing to listen to Sam and Charlie talk about the fact that they knew when they were going to come forward, news stations and people who were going to tell their story were basically like, do you want to be anonymous? And they were like, while we'd probably love to be, we can't, because then all people are going to do is go, well, where are the receipts? Where's the proof? Where's your evidence? That is actually what Charlie said. And they knew what they were going up against with someone like the fame level of Jerry Harris, and the fact that if you didn't have a face associated, and that's the thing about victim blaming, is we put victims in a place where like it is hard for them to come forward because there's very little to gain. And I think of so many instances of people who come forward and talk about, hey, this thing happened to me. And then you always get this person or these people who immediately want to resort to, well, you're just looking for fame. You're just looking for attention. And it's like, these people are potentially ruining their like livelihoods. Like they're what are they gaining? And I will say, I appreciated this in the end. Charlie, when they were asked if they had any regrets, would they come forward again? They both very clearly said, yes, we would. And Charlie ended by saying, I want to be the start of change and cheer. And I think that is so important because as somebody who loves gymnastics, as somebody who loves cheerleading, I want to feel proud of the sports that I support. Like I think of like even like another sport that I think, like you said, hockey, another one that I think has had issues and over time is ice skating. These are things that like if we want them to be better, we need to allow change to happen. And I think this is like hopefully the start of change, of good change, because telling parents, hey, you need to have a more watchful eye, or you need to be more aware of what's going on. Like that's one thing. But like, again, it's not like parents are ignoring their children.
Yep.
But at the same time, think about it like this. If you're a parent and you have kids and your kids have basketball practice, you drop them off at the gym, they go through basketball practice, you pick them up. You don't know what's happening in that time period either. Now, in a lot of cases, a basketball practice is probably an hour or two. The thing with cheerleading and gymnastics is some of these practices are like 4 hours. Like they're living at their gyms. They're living at these competitions. And so this inherently makes these spaces, like we were talking about, just dangerous in a different way. That's not to say anything else, any other activities your kids are in can't be dangerous. Like, heck, show choir could have its own slew of issues when you think about like the amount of times that kids are allowed to be sort of alone without people and parents and adults present. And even then adults can be the bad people in this situation. But at some point, this sport, just like gymnastics, has to legitimately be looked at and addressed and understood why like this continues to happen, why we are allowing our children to be put into situations where they can be harmed at the hands of people who are taking advantage of the system.
Yep.
And if this is how it's going to continue, maybe we have to change the system.
Yep. And that's kind of something that I mentioned earlier when we were talking before we started recording, just like, how do you, because it's kind of like the scenario that played out in my head is like, basically in these spaces, it's like a locker room situation, right? So like you're telling me that other people around these individuals have no idea that something like this might be happening. Why are we continuing to turn a blind eye and not take allegations like these as seriously as they need to be? Every single allegation should be vetted, period. There shouldn't be I think that you're misunderstanding. No, you should look at every single one. Because in a way, when you turn a blind eye or try to downplay a situation, you're victim blaming. And I don't think that individuals out there that this is happening to are just making shit up. They should all be taken seriously.
If you just Google sexual assault in cheerleading and in gymnastics, I mean, there was a case recently filed just in December from two young women, two twin, against a coach at a gym. And here's the thing, and again, we can link all of these things. So if you want to go spend, I mean, it's a heavy topic, but it's good to just this from the USA Today reporters who broke all of these stories. They recently had an update as early as just a week ago, talking about how cheer coaches and athletes continue to work in sport despite sexual misconduct allegations. And just to like kind of give a really like quick overview of this, it's been over a year at this point since everything came to light about Jerry Harris, and that started to bring forward even more and more about the governing body of competitive cheerleading, again, the U.S. All-Star Federation. And just, again, USA Today had an investigation expose all of these weaknesses in the sport's child protection policies. And it's been over a year and little has changed. So example, so they kind of gave an examples of other gyms and cheer organizations that have failed to enact anything to protect their athletes. North Carolina gym owner Nicholas Sweeney was suspended by the USASF in January under law enforcement investigation relating to his conduct with athletes, including allegations that he'd taken photos of them and told one of them she could take off her underwear when changing into uniform. In an email to parents, the USASF said Sweeney would be prohibited from coaching athletes in the program, but parents emailed the USASF and its investigators more than a dozen times voicing concerns about his continued presence in the gym. So he's not coaching, but he's still present. He has denied wrongdoing, but it's like, As of, I guess, last Friday, from the time we are recording this, the co-owner of the gym says he's in the process of selling shares in the company in light of a permanent ban, and that he's no longer allowed in the gym. But again, how much had to happen? Here's another one. This is the one I was talking about. Jose Alvarez is facing 2 felony cases in Texas in which he is accused of sexually assaulting a teenage cheerleader and soliciting explicit photos from another. The 28-year-old was banned by the cheerleaders governing body in September, but he competed in April at the National Cheerleading Association's collegiate competition. It's just, the thing is like, what has happened is in so many cases, like, they're getting banned or they're told they can't be present, they can't do this, but like, you're finding out that these are like things that people had been reporting for months and months and months. Empire Cheer and Dance was banned in October after owner Michelle Robinson, a former sex offender who had been convicted of sexual battery of a teenage boy, registered the Ohio gym under her sister's name.
Oh my God.
She took part in a December cheer competition and registered for another in January after successfully reapplying for USASF membership by using a slight variation of the gym's name. It has been suspended again, but the fact that she has been successful in opening another gym in someone else's name or applying for this, just slightly changing her name. The USASF does not want to be interviewed, has released a statement that said the organization has implemented more stringent reporting and educational policies for members and has taken significant steps to respond to reports of misconduct, and that they are continuously looking for ways to improve athlete protection. But it's like,
ban these people. Period. Like, why are they? Oh my God, this is like mind blowing to me, and then like infuriating, because like, if take the allegations seriously, and if they're banned, then they're banned. They're not allowed back in under any circumstance whatsoever. And I don't care. The thing that I think that a lot of these things end up coming down to, and maybe it's not as simplistic as this, but is winning. Mm-hmm. You're placing a higher price on winning than actually taking care of the individuals that get you to a winning situation. That is mind blowing to me. And it's not just limited to this, but since this is what we're talking about, that's what it sounds like to me. Mm-hmm. That's insane.
Winning is, here's the thing. Like, there are issues in sports across the board. Like, it's not just related to this, but when we take a focus on cheerleading and gymnastics specifically, when we talk about like actually wanting to improve the sport, the fact that like the people who are supposed to be where you should turn, the people that you can trust, that you should be able to trust, where if I come to you, you're going to have my back, you're going to support me, you're going to help me navigate this. And the fact that they say, oh yeah, we're banning this person, and then you show up and that person is still in the gym, maybe not quote unquote coaching, but just still present, has to be a very jarring thing to feel like, oh, no one really cares. And you know, with this episode, it's hard because like we've presented a lot of problems without really any solutions. And I think like if I were to offer any kind of solution right now, at least in the interim, is one, listen and believe victims. Listen and believe people who tell you something is going on, because it is when we ignore and we kind of brush things off that things continue, and they are allowed to continue, and we turn a blind eye to what's happening, but also be very diligent. I think a lot about like when I cheered, and like I was very fortunate. I had great coaches. I never personally had any issues that took place when I was working out in any of the gyms locally. But I'm also cognizant that I don't know that my experience I cannot say that my experience is everyone else's experience. And I think that like something that we also have to be better about is acknowledging that like your personal experience with something is not the greater experience. Like, you can know somebody and think that they're super great, and that's not the experience someone else had. And like I said, like that's like when we talk about like kind of mourning a little bit of like the people that thought they knew Jerry, like that's what's really hard for somebody is like, you thought you knew this person and they proved not to be that. And that can be jarring, but like not feeling that like immediate need to be like, you're wrong. There's no way that they could do this. Absolutely not. The reality is they could, and they did. And that's crappy because now you have to come to terms with like, well, we missed it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's unfortunately the reality is sometimes people fool us. Sometimes people are not who we think, and we need to believe people when they come forward. And this is a whole separate thing, but I know sometimes when these conversations people come up, it occasionally comes up where someone is like, what if that person's lying? It's very rare. It's very rare that people are lying about, because what benefit are they getting from this? Like, what is Charlie and Sam, like, what are they gaining?
Yeah.
Like, they have dealt with a lot of people who didn't want to believe them, and a lot of people who thought they were just trying to destroy beloved Jerry. And it's like, these are two young men who just really love a sport and wanted to be able to compete and wanted to be able to stay within their sport.
I wanted to feel safe.
And we should be able to respect that and support that. Just, I don't know. Like I said, it feels like one of those times where it's like, I wish I had better like takeaways of like, what can we do? But it's like,
I think, and this is probably a whole entirely different podcast, but I think, and I'm not saying it's strictly American culture, but we are in America. I think it's kind of gotten to the point now where, and I don't know if it's a social media thing, and that's why I said it's probably a different podcast, but just the idea and essence of victim blaming. I think a lot of times when folks come forward with any type of sexual assault related trauma, they're not taken seriously because for whatever reason, we've gotten to this point where everyone assumes, it's not everybody, but a lot of people will assume, depending on, a person's fame or whatever, that for some reason that these victims have an ulterior motive, or anyone really. It's not just limited to famous people. It's every time, even a local case or a friend that that something has happened to, they're afraid to come forward because they don't want to be blamed for what happened to them. It's disheartening, and I don't know how we get to the next level of, accepting the fact that this shit happens, and it's on a daily basis. And I don't know how we evolve from just victim blaming. And it's not every single case, but it's a lot of times the reason that folks who have been assaulted or, have had inappropriate things happen to them have a struggle coming forward because of the implications for the victim. And it's backwards.
It is.
I don't know how we get to the next level, but let's spend some time thinking about that, because I don't know the answer either.
I mean, we can end here on a happier, positive note, but it is very like when we talk about like victim blaming. Times Athlete of the Year for 2021 is Miss Simone Biles. It is absolutely deserved after just what she brought to light at the Tokyo Olympics about her own mental health and just what she was going through, and how a lot of that is tied to what she experienced as a gymnast within USA Gymnastics. And just she was also abused within US Gymnastics. Simone is the absolute GOAT, but like she when she made the decision in Tokyo to not compete, when she decided that this is dangerous, I can't do it, the amount of people that wanted to victim blame her, oh, she's just looking for attention, she's just doing this. The fact that was an immediate trigger response for some people, where they felt like this is her looking for attention, this is her that's when what Sasha's talking about, when we need to stop going to that first and start understanding that what Simone did was the strongest thing she could have done. When people come forward and they speak up, when they talk about their mental health, when they share the things that they are experiencing, and they're very open and honest about them, it is the bravest and strongest thing that they will do. And resetting how we focus on these things. And instead of going to like the negative of like, what are you trying to get out of this? And looking at as what are you doing for yourself that's not only going to better you, but also better the sport that you're in. Yeah. Like, she is absolutely 110% the athlete of the year. And you think of like the women like Naomi Osaka, who have also talked very openly about her mental health and making decisions to protect her mental health, and the people who came after her for that over and over, critics just going after them for quitting, for being this, for being that. But the thing is it is the strongest thing they will have ever done. And
by doing those things, I don't think that people realize this or take it into account. By doing those things and standing up for their mental health and coming forward about these things, they're furthering their careers. Mm-hmm. They're not being selfish if they're furthering their careers, and also using a platform that they have to make it less taboo to talk about mental health.
I mean, sports are not this, like, I think the one thing that I would like to take into 2022 is a lot of people in sports like to do this thing where they talk about how it's an escape. And yeah, it's an escape for us. Like, it's an escape to watch them be great. But you know who it's not an escape for? It's not an escape for Simone Biles when she has to go out there, battle her own mental health after being sexually abused by Larry Nassar, ignored by the United States, by USA Gymnastics, the failure across the board by even institutions like the FBI, the United States Olympics team. The fact that you have people like Colin Kaepernick who took a stand for things that they believed in and literally watched their careers end as a result of it. But the thing is like, a lot of people like to come after someone like Colin Kaepernick is like, well, if you would have just shut up and played football and no one would have ever. The thing is he's not complaining about it. He has found his way, and he's never going back to football at this point, but he is now an advocate for others. And I mean, he was the one who took a stand for her after Simone Biles, after her decision, saying that her influence extends far beyond the realm of sports and shows us that a better world is possible when we speak our truths with integrity and authenticity. And I'm going to link the Time article that has everything about Simone Biles, because the fact that like right now with anxiety and depression rates skyrocketing, with young people being so much more cognizantly aware of the way that they feel and not taking shit any longer, when you have people who are willing to step up, these big time athletes, the people that you go to escape the real world from, saying to you, I'm with you, I feel these things too, I'm going through it. It's going to be impactful. It's going to change things. And we can be super frustrated right now that things like the U.S. Cheerleading Federation, whatever, hasn't done enough. And it certainly hasn't. But I hope that like for individuals like Sam and Charlie, they know that they have started something that will hopefully, when we look a year, 2 years, 5 years down the road, is better. And if it's not on them. That's on us, because then we haven't done our job making the sport safer. So if you want sports to be an escape, if you want sports to be something where you don't have to think about anything else, start stepping up and allowing for change to happen. Because if you don't, it's never going to get better. And then you're going to just drive out your best athletes, because people don't want to deal with this shit. Oh my God. I don't have anything to add, because that's a mic drop, dude. That was perfectly said. We want sports to be better, right? Like that's like our thing.
And but you want them to stay around, because the only way things stay around is if they evolve. So allow them to evolve.
Well, this was a heavy episode to start the year, but here's the thing. We would love to hear from you. who do you want to hear from? Like, who should we have on the podcast? I have some ideas. I need to share them with Sasha. I have some people that I would love to talk to. We would happily talk about anything except for NFTs. I don't know anything about that. But what should we talk about? The thing that I would like to do with this podcast in 2022 is talk more about, continue these conversations, but it's just like, how do we make sports better? How do we make it more inclusive, more welcoming, more a safer space for people? And I'm not saying safe space like some people like to make fun of. I'm talking about a legitimately safer space for people to exist, to enjoy, because at the end of the day, we want
the human element of everything, like, yes, sports are great. I love to watch them, but I also love the human element of sports. So I would like to know that the answer to that question, like, how do we make it more human? How do we accept that they are humans?
Yes. So shoot us an email. You can find us at mindyourownpodcast@hailvarsity.com. You can also tweet at us at Erin Sorensen, at Sasha72. We'd love to hear what you think, what your thoughts are on all of this. Have you watched Cheer? What did you think of that 5th episode, if you have, or what have you taken away from just the last year or two of like allegations and the things that are coming forward about these sports and how we can make them better? We just want to hear from you. So again, email us, mindyourownpodcast@hailvarsity.com, at Erin Sorensen, at Sasha72. We will be back next week with another brand new episode. We're happy to be back here in 2022 with you. Thank you for coming into a new year with us.
Yes.
We appreciate you. And we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
A Huda Media Production.